Former Prime Minister John Howard has launched his long-awaited political memoir. It's called Lazarus Rising. And the former leader took time out at yesterday's launch of the book to thank his former Treasurer Peter Costello. But there seems to be no thanks this morning from his former deputy, who has written in Fairfax papers today saying that John Howard never intended to hand over the top job, despite what he says in the book. Peter Costello writes that John Howard wanted to claim all the achievements of the coalition government and, quote, does not intend to share the glory. Well, John Howard is with us now in the breakfast studio. John Howard, welcome to breakfast again.
Hello, friend.
The final chapter of the book is titled Reflections, and you say there in the first line, there is no excuse for personal regrets. What do you mean by that? Because isn't a political autobiography the very time for reflection and review with all the benefits of history, hindsight and time?
What I was trying to say there, and I did say it in this context, that when you had been in politics as long as I had, and when you'd been Prime Minister as long as I had, you really had no excuse for regrets, because if you'd done something wrong, you should have done something about it when you were there. And I don't have an enormous amount of time for people who've held very high office, and they do controversial things, and all Prime Ministers do controversial things, some more than others. And then later on, when the tide of historical judgment goes against those things, they sort of seek some kind of redemption or acclaim by saying, oh, I was wrong, and then accept the applause of their erstwhile critics. That's never particularly appealed to me. I mean, I accept that I will be judged on what I did when I held the job, not on how I subsequently try to rationalise it. And I accept that some of the things I did were controversial. I believed in them, I tried to explain them, I tried to advocate them to the Australian public. But now that I'm out of office, I explain why I took those decisions, I defend them, I conceptualise them or contextualise them, but I don't seek now to say, well, look, I was completely wrong on that, and that's not my style.
It's not your style, and I think everyone understands that. That's why you're branded a conviction politician, but life is a continuum.
Of
Are
course.
you saying you have no doubts over any policy decision you made as PM and will never have doubts?
Well, I can only speak of now, and everybody can only speak of now, but I didn't have any doubts about the major decisions I took. I accept that there were some execution errors, and I talk about them. For example, in the context of industrial relations, it was plainly a political mistake, although arguably not an economic or employment mistake, to abolish the no disadvantage test when we introduced work choices in 2005. That was a political error, and we sought to correct that while we were still in office with the introduction of the fairness test in 2007. I acknowledge those things. I acknowledge some of the mistakes I made in the personal handling of Indigenous affairs, my overreaction at the reconciliation meeting in Melbourne in 2007, when I reacted rather angrily.
In 1997, sorry.
No, 1997, I'm sorry. When you have read the book, reacted rather angrily just to some interjections on the WIC issue. But, I mean, I acknowledge those. I acknowledge some of the mistakes we made in relation to misreading the attitude of the public on petrol prices and excise, although I did, and John Anderson didn't. And I make that point in the book.
On some fronts, some obvious fronts, policy fronts, people might expect you to have some doubts. I'm thinking about on the Iraq War, as it's turned out, on the decision not to deliver an apology to the Indigenous Australians, as it's turned out, and on the decision not to hand over to Peter Costello before 2007. I'll come to each of those things,
Sure.
but on many fronts, as time moves on, doubts surely will arise.
Well, not in the sense that you put it, Fran, because you take a decision based on the information that's available at the time, and you can only ever do that. I mean, we all might do things differently with hindsight, but you're asking me as to whether I look back and I regret having done that when I did it according to the judgment I made at the time. Now, look, we can spend all morning. This is
Sure,
this
okay.
is
Well, let's
becoming
go
a
to
sort
one
of
of those
what I might call one of these sort of semantic debates, rather than look. What I'm saying is that I don't have regrets about the major decisions I took. I believed in them, but most importantly, I accept responsibility for them. I'm not now saying, oh, well, look, really, you shouldn't judge me harshly on that because at the time I was this, that and the other.
Well, let's go to the Iraq War on that front.
Yeah, sure.
Nick Minchin, who was a member of your cabinet and was for some of the time a member of the National Security Cabinet, in his speech...
Well, he was co-opted to the National Security Committee when we were discussing financial matters. He was not a regular member of it.
All right, so some of the discussions clearly on the war he sat through.
Well, look, I've no way of recalling that without checking the records.
He is, in his debate on Afghanistan in the Senate, which he attended yesterday, he didn't present in person, he said the debacle that ensued in Iraq has made the vital campaign in Afghanistan more protracted and more difficult. Now, if you agreed with that, presumably that would be a regret. Do you agree with that comment?
No, I don't. I hadn't heard him, incidentally, put that argument before. I'm not saying that he's arguing that he did put it before, but it's the first I have known of his reservations about it.
He also wrote that, I regret we were not able to be more successful in persuading the Bush administration to remain focused on Afghanistan rather than opening up another front in Iraq. I mean, did you try and convince the US?
No, well, that is wrong. We weren't trying to persuade the Bush administration not to go ahead with the operation in Iraq. We weren't. No, we certainly weren't.
Should we have?
No, I don't know. Well, I deal with this very extensively in the book, obviously, but no. And Nick has also talked about Colin Powell. Powell was not arguing against the operation in Iraq. He was in the lead-up to the invasion. What Powell was doing was arguing within the administration there should be more troops. The real differences between Rumsfeld and Cheney on the one hand and Powell on the other related to two things. They related to the size of the military force involved, and they also related to whether attempts should be made to get another Security Council resolution. Now, I certainly supported the Powell view about getting another Security Council resolution, and that is a view I put to George Bush. And the main reason for that was it gave greater, the fact that we tried to get it gave greater moral authority to what we were doing, and it was also very important to Tony Blair because the resistance to the intervention in Iraq in the British Labour Party was very strong, and Blair was having an almighty domestic political fight getting the support of his own party, and in the end, of course, he had to carry the resolution in the House of Commons with the support of the Conservative opposition.
There was criticism at the time for pulling our troops out of Afghanistan and shifting them to Iraq, but I just want to ask you, 9 years on, Australian soldiers still fighting and dying in Afghanistan. Do you accept that the engagement might have been shorter if the coalition hadn't shifted its focus and most of its troops out of Afghanistan and sent them to Iraq?
I think the judgment has to be that this operation was always going to take, it was always going to be more protracted than we might have wanted. That, in a sense, is the dilemma of liberal democracies. Our enemies have all the patience and all the resources, and I have to say, in the case of the Taliban, all the fanaticism, to keep going indefinitely, and they are comforted in the knowledge that in the end, the domestic front will tire of the operation and say the war's unwinnable and bring our forces home. Now, to people who are saying that, and the people are now saying it in the Parliament, not the majority, I might say, but a minority are. And my answer to them is, if we go out of Afghanistan in circumstances of defeat or withdrawal, just contemplate the impact of that on Pakistan.
Even if it means being there another decade, as the PM said?
Well, even if it does, I think that would be a superior thing to do than to deliver a victory which would inevitably lead to a further destabilisation of Pakistan. People should think about Pakistan the whole time in relation to Afghanistan. It's a neighbouring country. It's a very heavily populated country. It's had a very unstable government. It's nuclear armed. Just think about that. And think about a Pakistan, capable Pakistan in the hands of the Taliban. You don't have to be very imaginative to understand what's involved in that.
Mr. Howard, can we move on now to another chapter in your autobiography on the challenge of Indigenous policy? You restate your view that an apology from the government would have been wrong in your view, and that there was too much guilt and shame around generally in Indigenous policy.
Yes.
In terms of that apology, I suppose I was a bit surprised at your certainty there, given the overwhelmingly positive response to the formal apology to the Stolen Generation given by Kevin Rudd within months of the change of government. Didn't that make you wish at all that you'd done it?
No, I hadn't changed my mind on that. I found that the apology issue was not one that was regularly exercising the minds of people as I moved around the country. Look, I understand and respect the opposite view. And I just ask the people who held the opposite view to understand and respect mine. I mean, I don't think fair dinkum apologies ever exist unless they're delivered by the original perpetrator.
I understand that view, and I understand that people weren't perhaps raising it with you as a rent around, but when it happened, people, I think it's pretty fair to say that the nation felt good.
Well, look, certainly that was how everything was reported. Look, I accept that, but I mean, you're asking.
You don't think that?
No. Well, you ask. Look, I accept that the issue has now been dealt with, and the country, to use this cliche, has moved on to other things. I accept all of that, but you're asking me, do I regret that we didn't deliver a formal apology? No, I don't. I have not revisited my opinion on that, Fran, and I say that with the greatest of goodwill to people who have a different view and the greatest affection and respect for the Indigenous community of Australia. I just had a different view. I've explained it, and my view's not changed.
No, I know, but I'm wondering why you don't regret, for instance, when you hear a Liberal MP like Ken Wyatt.
Why I don't.
Well, a new Liberal MP, Ken Wyatt, stood up and
I campaigned for him.
And he thanked Kevin Rudd in his maiden speech. He thanked Kevin Rudd for the apology, and laid out why it was important to him. When you heard that, did you think that's so important to him? It's good we've done this.
I haven't changed my mind, and if I had remained in office, I would not have taken a different view. Now, I'm sorry that I can't say something differently to you, but that you're asking me my opinions, and that's all I can ever do.